a different approach to putting our clients first. Avison Young's U.S. investment sales group oversees multifamily, office, retail development, and specialty sales across the country. We give you direct access to our 60 U.S. offices to source the best acquisition opportunities or to advise on dispositions. Our principally led teams leverage the best research and data analytics to provide you with tailor-made strategies to achieve superior results. Please visit avisonyoung.us/capital-markets or follow James Nelson NYC to learn more.
Welcome, everyone, to our third and final installment of our mini-series on investment sales brokerage. I'm your host, James Nelson, Principal and Head of U.S. Investment Sales. And with us again is Marion Jones, who is our Executive Managing Director for U.S. Capital Markets here at Avison Young. And, after getting a lot of requests, they said, James, you've had these great shows interviewing investors, developers. I myself am a broker. I'd like to learn more about how to be a good broker. And so we've put together this 3-part mini-series. So if you haven't heard the first part, that was really geared towards those starting out in investment sales brokerage. The second installment then covered for those of you who are kind of 5-10 years in the business. And today we're going to be talking about brokerage mastery. But look, this episode will be helpful to you whether you're just a broker or let's say you're a principal, or let's say you're in any other business where you're looking to grow your presence and your knowledge base. A lot of these principles are certainly universal. So, Marion, with that, how would you like to kick off the conversation?
James, one thing I was thinking about as we were, leading up to today was how do we really define mastery, right? Maybe it's a good sort of way to kick us off is to think about how do we define mastery if you're an investment sales broker? What does that mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a revenue number? Is it a certain level of comfort across different types of transactions? What do you think mastery means?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of, I love Malcolm Gladwell, and I'm trying to remember which book it was where he talked about the 10,000 hour rule. Yeah. And, for those of you who have not read the book, it's definitely, well, first I have to tell you what the book is. I'm trying to remember if it was Tipping Point or Blink, but we'll put in the show notes which one it was. But, a lot of people think, oh, well, did the Beatles just show up one day?
It was Tipping Point.
Were they just, these incredibly gifted musicians? And of course they were. But it was really the reps, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize that the Beatles supposedly played outside a pub in England, basically gigging, throughout the whole day, and just thousands of hours playing together, just understanding and really mastery. But I think, intuitively knowing how to handle situations, right? And so when you've gotten to a point, and Marion, I know we've both been doing this for, approximately the same amount of time. And when I think really one of the parts that I really enjoy about the business is the problem solving, and no two situations ever seem to be the same, right? So you're always dealing with new things. And for me, part of the fun is figuring out, how do you present solutions? But above all, when you do that, and we've talked about this in kind of the prior segments to this, it's very much being aware and putting yourself in the client's shoes, right?
Yes.
So really understanding, not just leveraging that knowledge base, but saying, okay, well, what's in the best interest of the client, and how do we help the client solve their issues?
I like that. 2 things that you just said that kind of resonated with me. One was that you've put in so many reps that you kind of have this intuition, right? So the intuition is something that, we all have some level of intuition about situations or people or whatever, but really refining your intuition and learning to sort of trust it. I think that's when a really masterful broker will see the pitfalls and the landmines and the risk before they're even on the horizon, and can help navigate clients around those risks and those potential pitfalls. And it's almost like a sixth sense that you have, and I'm sure you feel this way. Sometimes, you're about to award a contract and some sort of, very subtle, nuanced little communication comes from the buy side, and you're thinking, I'm not feeling the same level of commitment I got from these guys 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you pivot course, but you take it as a data point and you let that inform kind of your intuition about sort of how to proceed from there and how to advise your client. So, and sometimes it means that we do more diligence on those buyers. There's a lot of different ways to handle it, but I think your point about intuition was really great. And then the other thing, you're talking about the Beatles, which, I grew up with a father who made us listen to the Beatles, all the time, hours on end in the car when we were on road trips. So Beatles are really special. And it's a great example because not only do they put in all the hours and the reps, but I also think, I always like to talk about teams and team chemistry, and they developed such an amazing chemistry that brought out each other's genius, and they put in those reps together. And so I think it's a really apt comparison or metaphor because we are, you can achieve mastery, but I think you get there better when you're surrounded by great people that you've got chemistry with and you've got feedback from, and you can kind of tackle things in unison.
Marion, I'm so glad that you brought that point up because business mastery is not just being, the best solo lone wolf broker. Sure, we all know examples of those brokers that have, been doing this for decades and they seemingly do it all on their own. But I will tell you that, 9 out of 10, if not 99 out of 100 of the most successful brokers are there because they have an incredible team.
Yes.
And so, yes, that is building the right team. That's certainly a huge part to, I know, what we're doing here, not just in New York, but now across the country. I think at the core of that is also understanding what everyone's strengths are, right? And so I think, regardless, again, if you're doing brokerage or you're on the principal side, understanding where can you add the most value, right? And then complementing that with other people who, look, do I know how to look at an Argus run? Absolutely. Could I underwrite a deal on Argus? No. So having the right team to analyze the deal, to do the diligence and, get that transaction done is really important because this is a huge, if you want to grow your business, you really have to take that team approach, and couldn't agree with you more about having that experience. On our team, I should look at what the average tenure is working the group. It's probably at this point close to 10 years, right? And if you look at Scott Singer's group, I think he's got people who he's been working with now for decades, right? And that says a lot.
And, there's so much to be said for the team and the team chemistry. And you were talking about leveraging each other's strengths and finding the complementarity. And, I'll share that I think one of the best business relationships that helped me grow so much and helped me refine my instincts and my intuition and my judgment as it came to sort of all of these little subjective things that can really inform the outcome of a deal and really be very meaningful to your client. One of the best business relationships I had was with a partner, and we just were so trusting and candid with each other. And there was really no ego. So we had the ability, we would take meetings or have formal pitches or, try to help a client out of a situation that was fraught or troubled or, they were underwater, and there's a lot of moving parts. And we could just really candidly, after every situation, give each other feedback. And it was just open, honest. There was no ego involved. And he was like, hey, you were really great, kind of covering this one thing. But when we delved into this situation, I felt like we could have handled it differently or maybe a little better. And I would do the same for him. But it was like the best relationship. We were really close friends, knew each other really well. And you think about, like, if you're watching, like an NBA team or something, and they know each other's moves so well that, when you're, I'm going to make it sound like I'm a big basketball person and I'm not. So if I fumble it, but, the reality is if you're passing and that the person is so fast that you're passing, the guard is so fast that you're passing down court to, that you're that you're passing to him 3 steps ahead of where he is now, right? You understand your partner's instincts, their movements, where their head is at, how they sort of conduct themselves. And then suddenly you can become not only like an incredibly efficient, powerhouse for your clients, but wow, do I get better when I can work with a team like that? And we can give each other feedback and get to know each other so well and just be really open and transparent about who's good at what, how we all make it work as a team for the greater good.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing this up. And we're talking about brokerage mastery, but we're also talking about, how to be a good partner. How do you grow,
I think they're hand in hand.
Grow a business?
I think they're hand in hand.
For sure. And I know that if you look at what we're doing here in New York, it doesn't happen without, Erica Dean was heading up operations. Now he's taken on a national role. Brandon Polikoff, star broker here. Again, we complement each other, right?
Yes.
We're very good. Like Brandon's really good at getting in the weeds, and he can tell you everything you ever wanted to know about rent regulation. He teaches landlord tenant attorneys about, certain nuances. Whereas, Eric is tracking, he's figuring out, how do we scale? How do we get the right infrastructure? And, my partners in that business, we challenge each other to your point. And it's like, okay, well, James, it's great you're doing all this, but we need you focusing your time here. I also love coming up with ideas. And Eric, to your point, he challenges me on some of them, but also helps me prioritize, right? He says, okay, this is okay, but we can't do 100 things. Let's do, 3 things and do them really well. So even on this is a really small example, but I was so glad I posted something on LinkedIn the other day. And I thought I was kind of, making a joke about it. I had visited our San Francisco office and I got this incredible views there. But then I said, New York, we should get some, some better views in our office. We actually have a great view. We happen to be on the 4th floor, a beautiful view over Fifth Avenue.
If you like the St. Patrick's Day parade, we have an excellent view.
True. Yeah. But you said, James, it seems like, maybe remove that little last part of the post. I said, Marion, thank you, first of all, for taking the time and noticing. And for me, it's like, we're all busy and we're doing stuff. So there was no again, you just said that to make sure let's all help each other and put our best selves first. So
I think that's just part of having each other's back, right? Yeah. And so we learn from the thing. We all sort of, want the input and the feedback from others. It makes us better. And as we become great partners and teammates and so forth, we get more in return. And so I genuinely believe mastery is just as much about an individual's motivation, instincts, habits, commitment, all of those things, willingness to learn, willingness to push themselves, as it is about, maybe to a certain extent, self-selecting into the right environment, into the right team, into the right situation where you can be around great people who will make you better. I don't think you develop mastery on your own. I think you develop mastery with great people around you. Yeah,
you're 100% right. And, Marion, I was going to ask you because, certainly, the team is a big part of success, but also is the platform that you operate on. And I know some of the questions that I've received in the past, whether they're brokers who are just starting out, or maybe they've been at a smaller boutique shop, is it better if I start off at a small shop, go work for a big, global full service firm? So, what would you say to that? I mean, you've worked at some of the top brokerage firms in the world, publicly traded. I mean, here at Avison Young, we've got 120 offices around the world. We're full service, so we're not the biggest out there, but you've seen kind of the benefits of the different types of platforms. So for our brokers out there listening, thinking about, am I in the right shop? Where can I, be most helpful to the clients? How would you answer that?
And I do think this is one of those topics that is really applicable to the principal side too. We've seen, so many of our friends and clients and peers in the industry kind of come up through the principal side in different ways. So, I think when you're at one of the really bigger shops, you have access to great research, you have access to incredible professionals who have great relationships and are really sort of masters of their craft. And there's a lot of them, right? Because the scale is there. So there's a lot of them. So, I think that can be a good environment for some folks. I think it's increasingly hard to develop mastery at really small firms. I'm talking single office firms. It can happen. And there's a lot of passion and commitment sometimes in those places. I think our business has become very interdisciplinary and very complex. And so I do think there's an advantage to a certain amount of scale if you're really talking about developing mastery. So I do think there's an advantage. What I like about our scale is that we have the ability to really see the individual, right? We have the ability, I take great pleasure and fulfillment and understanding exactly, who our people are, what they're great at, what is their hidden genius, and how do we sort of help them position themselves within the platform so that we can extract that genius out of them and that we can do it for the benefit of our clients and also do it for the benefit of sort of the greater platform and certainly to the benefit of that individual is they're all, seeking, I think there's no real final mastery, right? We're all in constant growth. So what I like about our scale, where we're very large in certain respects, but we're kind of in this middle zone where maybe we're not as big as our publicly traded larger competitors, but we can invest in the individual and we can really see the individual in a way that I think is unique and really competitive. And it works, I don't want to sound too much like an Avison Young commercial, and hopefully I'm not, so forgive me if I have done that, but I'm just watching it in real time play out, that we're able to sort of be really nimble and craft the talents of individuals in a way that can be scaled and leveraged appropriately. So I think it's a little harder to do that when you're in a really big place. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to know every single individual and try to work with them to help best position them individually.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of great points here. And, there's different perspectives on this, right? And I would say, kind of channeling my mentors and where I started my career with Bob Knackel and Paul Massey. And they were saying, okay, we're going to take the city, we're going to carve it up into territories, and you are the expert at this neighborhood. It's 50 blocks, you track everything that goes on there. And I even covered it in my book. And I said, whether you're doing brokerage, whether you're investing, become an expert. And it's hard to become an expert when you're a generalist, right? So, obviously in brokerage, you can do investment sales, you can be a debt equity advisor, you can do leasing, you can do management, property management. But if you're talking about sales, picking an asset class, picking a geography, I think that's really helpful, right? And that's, that applies kind of for certainly if you're starting off in the business, certainly if you're in that 5 to 10 year role. But when we're talking about brokerage mastery, at that point, you very well could be leading a division and you have people on your team. So for example, here in New York, we have a multifamily division, a retail, an office, a land sale, right? So we have that specialty in-house. And, those people running those groups, like if you ask Brent Glodowski about retail, he knows more about it than I do in the city, as he should, right? Sure. Because he's really been able to focus in. So it's kind of a long way of saying, because, the idea of, do you work, a small firm where your focus is very specific, right? So if you ask Bob Knackel, he'd say, I'm the land sale expert in New York, and he tracks every transaction, and yes, he knows it through. And at the same time, I've asked Bob, and my observation and part of my excitement of taking on this national role here for Avison Young is, look, for 25 years, I focused my brokerage career on New York, where I had the blinders on, where I had all these investors who I was just talking to them. In some cases, New York was a huge part of the pie. In some parts, it was just a sliver of the pie, right? But someone should have told me, given me the memo in 2019, and you probably remember in New York, that was when Albany passed the Housing Stabilization Tenant Protection Act. And all of a sudden, investors who had prided themselves in having their entire portfolios here in New York we're all of a sudden saying, you know what, the government's changing the rules on me here. And I don't know if that's a good idea to have everything here in New York. Let me think about diversifying my portfolio. And the interesting thing, and we can put this report out there, we've been tracking the capital flows from New York and going to other markets. So this is a very long way of saying that if I was just at a boutique firm that was New York focused, it would be, okay, I can help you here in New York, but good luck. As you start to search out these other markets.
Right.
But now in this role, it's I don't have to know every single market out there, but we have 60 offices across the U.S. And if you want to go invest in Dallas, I can introduce you to Susan Burks or Mike Kennedy in our office, and they know the lay of the land. And if I have the relationship here, I can say, hey, look, let me make the introduction. You're in good hands.
Right. Right.
So that's, again, it depends how you want to grow your business. And again, not just talking about brokerage, but if you're an investor, if you're thinking now about investing nationally, well, okay, what's your plan? Are you part of a company that has boots on the ground, or do you have partners, resources? That's something you have to think about, because it's tough to expand if, everything is just focused in one specific area, if that makes sense.
Right. And look, I think mastery will look different for different individuals. And, there's no one formula. But I do think your environment, both your immediate team and your platform, really inform how quickly you can get there, right? And, to what degree that you're going to keep growing. So what I love about what you're doing, which I think is so cool, is that, you've kind of been, you're very humble, but I would say you have developed true mastery in, what you do, but you keep pushing yourself to do more and to think about things differently and to keep growing. And so to me, that's the sign of someone who can be someone who can be a true master or achieve true mastery, is they're never done. Right? They're never done. There's you're noticing the memo that, or the sort of the capital trends, the flight of capital out of New York. And it started happening in other gateway cities where capital was saying, we see better growth opportunities in other markets. We're going to reallocate and reshuffle our portfolio. Seeing that and saying, well, how do we help better serve our clients? And how do I personally keep growing and expanding? And I think that's part of it, is this, view that I can always keep challenging myself to do better and to do more and to take it up another level. And then you get to that level and you're just inspired to take it up another level. And it never ends, and it shouldn't.
Well, Marion, I definitely appreciate your saying this. And I know that you share in the same curiosity. And look, you could have spent your entire business focused here in, New York as well. But, you're excited also by the opportunity to help grow the platform and do business across the country. And for me, again, whether it's brokerage or if it's investing, I think kind of that intellectual curiosity and continuing to grow. If you're just doing the same thing over and over, I probably would have gotten bored of this business long ago.
Sure.
But like the challenge of going into new markets, meeting new people, figuring out different capital stacks and how to get deals done. It's really fascinating, and it's what makes things so interesting. Now, I was going to ask you, because I think, in this discussion and thinking about, brokerage and, how has it evolved over time? So if we're talking about mastery, we're also talking about maybe people who own their own brokerage businesses out there.
Yes.
Maybe it's a boutique firm right now that's thinking like, okay, is the world, passing me by? What would you say kind of are advancements in the brokerage business, and how are, firms like ours better helping clients? Like, what are things that brokers need to think about to stay competitive?
So I think, the access to great information and the ability to take data and data analytics and research and really not just see trends, but sort of get ahead of them, that is really important. And I do think it's really hard to do in a boutique place. There are wonderful boutiques out there, and they are great at what they do. So I want to, not sound so negative, but it's hard. It is really hard. So I do think that the data analytics, the understanding of sort of, this is a very, we live in a time right now, the market is a bit volatile. We are undergoing massive structural shifts to our economy, and also with technology, with just the way we do business. We're all using AI all the time.
Right.
All the time at this point. I think you are too. So we get a lot of efficiency out of it, but as we get more efficient and as we sort of use tools in different ways, so is everyone else, right? So I think that it's access to data, access to not just kind of past looking data, but being able to sort of get in front of trends, give clients advice that is like not backward looking, right? Oh, this is where all the deals were closing 6 months ago. Well, that doesn't help anybody, right? So I think a lot of it is around not just getting great data, but having the critical thinking kind of apparatus within your platform. Like our market intelligence, I think, is exceptional. I genuinely believe they're the best at what they do. And that's one component of many. But to me, that's the most important piece, is really being able to give this is a turbulent time. And if we are doing our jobs right, we can really help our clients make good bets and position themselves for success. And I think you got to use the market intelligence to do that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm glad I brought up Malcolm Gladwell earlier, because it's interesting. He spoke to our company and talked about the fact that we're in this golden age of data. So there's more data now than we've ever had. So then the question is, well, how do you, first of all, what is the right data that you're looking at? And then how do you make it actionable? So I know we have a platform called Avant. Now we call it Avison Young Technologies, and it uses 100 adjacent data sources. I mean, some of the things that you all probably see is our busyness index and anonymized cell phone data, and seeing who, shows up to the office, either in a city or, geofencing, more specific locations. That's just like, kind of step one, if you will. I mean, we go much deeper. And the question is, how do we help our clients make better informed decisions? So if you're in the healthcare space, it might be looking at where are insurance claims being filed by, and who is your patient, and where do they live, and where do you want to be, and advising them where to open up. So again, if you don't have that technology, it's complicated. You're probably not getting it off the shelf. You probably have to develop it in-house. It's expensive. So, I think you're right to think about those would be some of the reasons why maybe a boutique firm want to join a larger shop to leverage that. But I did, and I want to talk about, is the brokerage business, is it becoming more consolidated, or is it becoming, I don't want to use the word fractured, but, one of the things that Bob Knackel talks about, and is certainly proud of, and it's a wonderful thing to see, but he's now tracked over 30 Massey Knackel alums who are now at different firms.
Right.
So who even knew that there was over 30 brokerage firms in New York? There are, right? So the question is the trend that you're going to see more and more, of these smaller brokerage shops, or it seems like meanwhile, the big shops are still writing big checks, buying talent. You see some of these brokers hop around every 5 years. They're looking for the next contract. What do you make of all that?
Look, I think that that's just the nature of kind of the business, right? And I do find it fascinating, the sort of entrepreneurial legacy of Bob and Paul, right? And it is fascinating, and it's cool, and it's for those who are sort of zeroed in on New York, you're familiar with it. For those who are listening from elsewhere, it's Bob Knackel and Paul Massey. I think it's been amazing to watch the kind of Bob and Paul legacy, where there are so many, brokers who have achieved mastery. They've opened their own firms. And I don't know to what extent that is unique to New York and sort of the Massey Knackel legacy. I suspect it is somewhat unique to New York, and we're also a very robust marketplace that can accommodate a variety of types of businesses, whether it's small boutiques or certainly the larger publicly traded firms. So I think it's a little bit of a New York phenomenon, would be my guess, is that because it is this dense marketplace, and because there are still such a diversified marketplace from a sort of dollar size, right? I mean, you can still, it's not easy, but you can still find $2 million deals in New York City. And you can also find $1 billion, transactions to be had in New York City. So I think that diversity of the landscape can accommodate, a lot of different ways of setting up a business in New York. From an individual standpoint, I think, whether you're in New York or in any other marketplace, onus is on you to self-select and to, ask the right questions and self-select into places where you can achieve that mastery, where you are going to feel like you've got the tools, the wind at your back, the access to relationships. And, if you're in a sort of a smaller deal space, that might look and feel a little different than if you're in a more institutional space. It's all good. There's no better or worse. There's lots of different ways to do this business. But I think, the diversity of this particular marketplace, we sit in New York today. Today, you're all over the place, but today we happen to be sitting in New York. I think that speaks to that diversity of business type.
Yeah, I don't have the stats to back this up, but would love to see this analysis at some point, is how many sales brokers are there in a market, divided by how many, total trades there are. I think there's probably more brokers here in New York than any market per transaction.
Right.
So if you look at the 10-year average, there's about 1,000 properties that sell in New York City a year.
Right.
That sounds like a lot. But if I told you that there was 100 sales brokers here in New York, I think I'd probably, when you talk about the teams, right?
Sure.
We have 24 people here at Avison Young alone, right? And you thought about how many brokers are out there, looking to do deals, right? There's a lot of brokers for every potential transaction here. And New York has to be one of the most competitive markets out there, right?
No question.
And part of it is the scale, and there's a lot to do.
But what? Everywhere has gotten competitive.
Yeah.
I mean, I was catching up with some colleagues in Boston who closed a fairly notable deal. And I don't know if it's kind of hit the papers yet, so we'll keep it confidential. But it was a large transaction, and they were competing against, a pretty formidable group of competitors. And and that's just, it's every major market. It's not just, what we used to think of as like, the primary East and West Coast cities. It's everywhere. We know that as capital has flown into, or as capital has moved into the Southeast and Texas and other markets, that those markets are showing, increased competition. So definitely, New York has always had a competitive culture, whether you're, in real estate or on Wall Street. That's just who New York is.
Yeah.
But gosh, I think we see stiff competition. We're fortunate that we, often have repeat clients and we win that business, and it's a great place to be in. But, I think the world has gotten competitive.
Yeah. And the data and the access to information has gotten a lot more transparent. So, I mean, maybe with the exception in Texas, which is a non-disclosure state where you don't have the sales transactions, but theoretically you can go into any market now and you can see what the trades are and you can get up to speed pretty quickly. So that does level the playing field. I will say, and this might be, advice now, whether you're someone just starting out in the business, maybe you're 5 to 10 years into it, maybe you're thinking about reinventing yourself, you've been doing this for a while, maybe you're an industrial broker and you're watching this whole data center boom. I think we should note that the business is evolving and there are sectors that, are growing. I mean, I know a couple of years ago, life science was going to be the new thing. And maybe now that they're having some challenges. And now it seems like, data centers could be, the modern day gold rush and land. And it's just interesting to me, our brokers, the traditional way to enter is going and working for a multifamily shop and, cold calling. But I don't know, maybe the better approach today is to go and, get some higher education on, what goes into a data center and how to understand, the power needs and the approval process. So these are things that, even if you've been in brokerage for, 20, 30 years, and you're a great example of this, always continuing to educate yourself. I mean, we were both out in Denver for ULI. A big part of that is sitting in on the product councils and seeing what everybody's doing and learning, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's spot on that as you develop mastery, you're also, we kind of touched on this before, you're watching the world around you. And so, for me, wrapping my brain around someone who is, sort of stuck to what I would call the major food groups for most of my career, really wrapping my brain around some of the specifics and technicalities around data center development and, the types of intricacies relative to the power and approval processes and so forth. That's been a learning curve. I'm still on that learning curve, but it's important, right? Because I see what's happening around me and I want to be, while I may not be a data center expert within our platform, I want to be a valuable team member to those who are. And so it's important to continue to have that, climb that learning scale. But I think that's part of the mastery, right? Is that, we talked about this, you're never not done. I think, if it might be helpful to sort of think about what are some of the characteristics or qualities that go into expediting those learning curves, so that if we kind of defined mastery as being able to, any given transaction, you sort of have the right instincts and intuition because you put in the reps, that you can navigate your client through whatever might emerge, right? And that's maybe one way to look at mastery. You're someone who's saying, not there yet, but I'm close. how do you expedite that time frame? What are the things that person should be doing, embracing, qualities or characteristics, or maybe just tactical moves that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's a great question, and continuing to improve and learn. I mean, look, I think that there is, on one hand, so much information that you can access through top research, if that's what we want to call it. But I believe there's still, and I know you agree, still no substitute for getting out there. And yes, it's a time commitment, a financial commitment to fly out to Denver and, go to a conference like ULI. But when you get in the room, you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so when you start hearing from people about, okay, these new trends and where to look, then you at least know what are the right questions to ask. And again, that is the part of the business that I love, and continuing to grow and learn from others. And very much, this is still a people business. So, Marion, this has been a fantastic conversation, because I know we're talking about brokerage mastery. We've talked about a lot more as well, the value of partnerships and how to continue to learn. Maybe as we close it out, and maybe it's helpful to the audience, but we talk about brokerage mastery. Again, you could just be talking about how do you actually learn to transact better, how to, expand your relationships. But maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of expanding the platform, whether calling, being top of mind. I mean, here we are doing a podcast, and you might say, James, Marion, this sounds really self-serving. You're out here talking about how great brokerage is. I mean, look, I would say that, and hopefully this is helpful, whether you're, starting out in brokerage, you're growing a business, you're a principal. I think there's a big piece to just kind of putting that knowledge out there. And whether it's a podcast, I know you're a very accomplished speaker and you end up on panels, whether it's white papers, the importance, I think, of being that subject matter expert and staying top of mind. I mean, what would you say to all of this?
Well, one thing is that one reason why I do enjoy being on panels, doing a certain amount of public speaking, is that when I like it, I like getting together and having discussions, but man, it also keeps me on point, right? So I want to be really thoughtful about, what is the message? What are some interesting things that we can, share with the group that maybe they haven't heard before, or maybe it's even a sort of contrarian way of looking at trends or data. And so I think that as people develop mastery, not everyone does a lot of public speaking. That's okay too. But there's a lot of ways to sort of get valuable, actionable kind of thought leadership or information to your audience. And, and you're working with an audience that is going to be attracted to not just, your ability to execute, but, what is it like to work with you? Am I going to come out of conversations learning something? Am I going to come out of conversations? Are you user friendly in a way? Am I going to come out of, as we're working together and you're representing me in the marketplace, are we going to be able to just kind of develop a rapport where I know that you are constantly thinking about the best way to position me and my interest and our, asset? And are you doing that? And are you working with me in a way where you're telling me in a transparent fashion if there's something going on with a transaction where, maybe you hit a road bump or there's some other issue that comes up that needs to be addressed? So I think that as you think about these skill sets, right, whether it's public speaking or, your ability to just engender trust and rapport with your clients, so important. There, you can emphasize many different ones, but a lot of it is really the same thing, which boils down to, am I on top of my information, right? Do I know the directionality of where the market is, of where the trend lines are? Do I know that, we're selling this asset at a cap rate that we priced 3 months ago, and given market volatility, that cap rate is not available today. So we've got to just do everything to communicate as quickly, efficiently, and as transparently as we can with our clients, with lenders, to get to a place where we're closing before there's a new round of sort of volatility that comes in and jeopardizes the pricing or the execution. So it's a long-winded way of saying, all of these things work together. I think that the public speaking, I like it because it keeps me on point, but the real part of being on point is what you're delivering to your clients and how you're helping them sort of navigate. I mean, this is a very volatile time, and it might be for some time, right? So I think all of this really speaks to the same thing, and it's mastery. And there are some folks that are, you do podcasts, you're a great public speaker. There are other folks who sort of, have probably comparable skill sets, but they're maybe not quite as public facing. Behind closed doors, the way they're advising their clients is just as on point. And that's okay too. It takes all types. But I think that's what it's about, right? It's really having that great message, having the great information, advising our clients, and being, a great partner to them along the way.
Well, Marion, I've got to give you a huge compliment. I mean, we've known each other definitely 10 years, maybe closer to 20 or somewhere in between. But having the opportunity to work alongside you this past year and watching how you work, so thoughtful and really putting in the time and the work, right? Really thoughtful, right? When you present. And that's been incredibly eye-opening to me. I'm kind of, if you ask most people, kind of like a progress as opposed to perfection guy, and I try to put a lot out there. And sometimes, you're better prepared than other times. But it's really, I love what you're saying about how these opportunities really help you get clarity and how you communicate that message. So this has been an incredible conversation. I think maybe one last thing I'll leave you all with as we break, because it's funny. I had a client call me this morning to tell me that he saw the Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing on the Blink. For those of you who don't subscribe to Blink, basically abstracts books. The Blink list, right, and then condenses it. And he said, James, your book is now the #1 book for real estate investing on Blink. And I'm like, well, I hope they still read the book, or maybe that'll encourage people to do it. But the point is, he then asked me, well, James, why did you write the book? And I've gotten this question a couple times. And the first thing I say is, well, it was mid-2020. We're home, camped out from COVID. When am I ever going to have time to write a book? But I said, look, for years, people always ask me, James, what is the book on real estate investing, right? And there's the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's, the textbooks. But I really wanted to write a book that explained how this all works. And so that was kind of the impetus. But I do say, look, it was a passion project, and then I wanted to do it. I love speaking at schools and sharing this book. And how does this fit into Brokerage Mastery? Just to bring us full circle, look, to share this experience, right? To put it out there to help not just brokers, but investors. It really becomes kind of a calling card in that way, but also something that I can put out there for the future. And so again, you made a great point, Marion, that it doesn't, whether it's speaking on panels, whether it's writing, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a book, you have to find, what is the medium that works best for you. And I think if you are going to do something like this, it also requires a great team. Like this doesn't happen on my own. For the book, it was having a great writing partner in Rachel Hartman and a great team. So I would encourage you all listening, figure out what that thing is. There's incredible resources out there. And I want to thank our incredible producer, Nick, who puts on this podcast as well. This doesn't happen with the right people. So I think once you figure out, what is that thing, how do you execute on it is a big part of it all. So I want to thank everybody for joining. This was a really great discussion. I've had a lot of fun with doing this mini series with Marion too. And, we might be breaking a little bit of news here now, but in the future, would not be surprised if another podcast kind of comes out of this. So we'll just put that out there, but I think we'll be putting more content out there for you in the future. So as always, we really appreciate your listening. The best thing you can do is you can share this episode with someone who would benefit from this. That's really a great thing. I forward podcasts all the time. I'm a huge consumer of podcasts, and I really appreciate when people send me things to listen to. So think about doing that. As always, you can go to jamesnelson.com. The site's not about me. I built the site for you. That's where you can find the show notes. That's how you can find out how to connect with Marion and a lot of other helpful things on there. So as always, thanks again, and we'll look forward to being in touch with you soon.
This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. The opinions expressed are those of the guests and not their companies. Listeners should not act upon the information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, lawyer, or other professional.
Thank you for listening to the Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing. We appreciate your subscribing and sharing with your friends. If you haven't already, please connect with James at James Nelson NYC on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Please also visit jamesnelson.com, where you can find the show notes and other episodes, along with an exclusive video series and other helpful resources, so you can gain the insider's edge to real estate investing. Until next week.